America's center of power changed, and with it, the dynamics of the political landscape. The consequences will reverberate locally, in Florida, on Capitol Hill, and on the global stage. Voters demanded change on the issues that mattered most: the economy, immigration, and social issues. Now, News4JAX goes beyond the headlines with political analysts who provide unique context and perspective. Experts focused on the issues making headlines. This is Politics and Power.
The Democrats are still trying to find their way. They're still trying to figure out why they lost the election to Donald Trump and the GOP. Still need to figure out if his policies, his age, his frailties are what doomed them in 2024. Whatever the answer, political analysts say they need to get their act together because the 2028 midterms are closer than they think. Among the fundamental questions Democrats must ask, did Joe Biden's team deceive them, or did they deceive themselves? Were their eyes closed to reality? Welcome to Politics and Power. I'm Bruce Hamilton. Joining me, political analyst Sean Frieder. Hey, welcome.
Always good to be here.
So let's start with the explosive new book from Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. In Original Sin, President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again. Published excerpts indicate the book dropped some real bombshells. The bottom line is it painted a portrait of a president whose faculties, both physical and mental, were, quote, diminished. And Tapper and Thompson say aides and advisors hid that from the public. Sean, was the public kept in the dark?
I mean, there's obviously talk before the election, even halfway into Biden's presidency, that he was dealing with some mental issues, that he was maybe getting too old for the job. But I think the scope of the decline, the severity of some of the specific cases that happened, I don't think we quite knew the extent of that. I don't think the book is surprising us by telling us that he might have had some issues in 2023. But, you know, there's some things that they say in the book as early as 2021, and I think that would surprise some people.
Yeah. David Plouffe, a veteran Democratic strategist who spearheaded the Kamala Harris campaign, is reportedly quoted in the book as saying, "We got so screwed by Biden as a party." Is it that simple?
I mean, certainly from the background of a campaign person, you've got a campaign that has to start 4 months essentially before the election. That's a nightmare from a perspective of campaigning. Now, I think the actual story of the 2024 election is a lot more complicated than that. Biden is not exclusively the albatross around the party's neck, but this certainly didn't help. And it made campaigning much more difficult. You have to come up with a whole new narrative, a whole new candidate, and back them within 4 months, get the fundraising for that. That's incredibly difficult. And it's almost unprecedented in the modern election world, even outside the U.S.
That points to the fact that there's the disconnect within the party, too. You know, you got the consultants, the gurus. They, I think, have to share some of the blame as well.
They do. I mean, this is also part of something that's a genuine debate within not just the Democratic Party, but campaign world generally is, are we trying to go after the swing voters? Are we trying to go after some of the people in the base? And Democrats have not quite figured this out. Republicans have done better in trying to figure out this balance. They've really just gone for the base and hope that the swing voters come along with them. Democrats have really been more timid in their strategy. They haven't gone for the base nearly enough. And I think in terms of at least turnout, that's probably cost them some. But also those that were saying, you know, Biden can make it through this election year, I think that they deserve blame as well.
So you think the Democrats have some other issues to reconcile as well?
They definitely do.
So among those issues?
I mean, figuring out how to attract the youth to their base. I mean, for the longest time now, about 20 years, the youth have been gravitating more towards Democrats than Republicans. But at the same time, we start to see some changes in the last year or two. That's not to say the youth isn't still leaning to the left. It very much is. But you're seeing, at least among younger males, a tendency to maybe support Trump more than they were expecting. I think that that's probably one of the factors that was difficult for Democrats in 2024. Huge gender gap amongst young people. They also have some ideological issues. Obviously, specifically in 2024, Israel-Palestine was a huge issue for them. I think they also generally have a difficulty in finding ways to talk about the economy that resonate with voters.
And are they trying to do that now with Bernie Sanders? Interestingly enough, trying to pass the mantle on to Ocasio-Cortez, who basically has changed her whole ideology?
I mean, AOC is definitely trying to now find a way to, I wouldn't say she's moved to the middle, but she's found a way, I think, to sort of unlock what we were talking about, is talking to voters in a way that her politics, they're very left-leaning. Economically, I think she's where she was several years ago, but the way she talks about it now is a little bit more measured. She's a little bit more careful in the way she talks. So I think she is probably at least one of the models going forward that the party is going to have to deal with, and I think she'll be probably a meaningful contender in 2028.
And the Dems have to figure out how to get to Latinos and Black
Absolutely.
Americans. And it's not so much who turned out at the polls, it's who didn't turn out at the polls that the Democrats have to figure out to get to.
That's right. I mean, the thing we always trying to remind people the last several months is that you had about 31% each voting for Trump, voting for Biden, 36 to 38% just not voting. And again, amongst those, the demographics we just talked about, particularly Latinos, those Latinos that did turn out to vote voted more for Trump and Republicans than they had in the past. So Republicans right now at least have found a way to temporarily win with Latinos. I think that there's been signs in recent polling after Trump's taken office that was more of a temporary than a permanent effect, but Democrats now have much more pressure on them than they did a couple years ago to find a way to win those people back.
Yeah, fair to say that those who didn't vote lost it for the Democrats more so than those who did?
To a certain extent. I mean, if you look at the demographics that turned out less, younger people, certain minority groups, that's definitely the Democrats' base. So turnout's a big part of the issue. But again, finding a way to resonate with people who listed economy as their number one issue. They might find it easier to do that now that we're in Trump's economy. But they definitely had a hard time selling Biden's economy.
Yeah, there are those in the party who just want Joe Biden and the frailty issue to go away. But with this new book out, Original Sin, is that even possible?
For now, definitely not. In fact, we're talking about it, that other people are talking about it. This is going to dominate headlines for the next several weeks. Democrats would hope, and I think it would be the case, that by the time we actually hit the 2026 primaries, by the time we go into the midterms, we'll be talking about probably Trump's time in office. I think the election, both the midterms and the next presidential election, are primarily just going to be referendums on Trump, just as they were under his first term. So they definitely want the conversation about Biden to stop, though, and you can see that in some of the quotes that they make.
You mentioned a referendum on Trump. Does it matter? He seems, well, they used to call Bill Clinton Teflon. Is Donald Trump Teflon?
To scandals, it certainly seems so. I mean, if Democrats are waiting for him to say something that's beyond the pale, they're going to be waiting forever. We've seen that there's really no bounds to what he can say and still retain reasonable amounts of support. If you look at his approval ratings, they really did fall off since he's taken office. They've bounced back a little in the last few weeks, but he was as much as negative 10 in approval ratings, and I think that's really closely associated with the economy. So I think fundamentals can hurt him, but his mouth can't.
I'll leave that alone. Back to David Plouffe, that Democratic strategist we mentioned earlier. He talks about having been recruited by Harris after Biden dropped out of the race after that disastrous debate performance. He described the move as a, quote, rescue mission, and that the expedited timeline Harris faced was a effing nightmare. They were his words. The implication is clear. Had Biden bowed out earlier, had there not been that dismal debate, things might have been different. Possible, had there been, a primary, I think is what he was talking about, could it have been different?
I think yes and no. It could be different also in the wrong direction, and that's something that a lot of the analysts aren't talking about. Tapper's book, certainly the central thesis is that by not dropping out earlier, it led to this effing nightmare that Plouffe and others had to deal with. But at the same time, if you have a long primary season, political science research finds that usually what that does is it causes all the candidates running to move farther towards their base. So you've got candidates moving away from the center towards the left. Depending on your belief about what good campaigning looks like for Democrats, that could be a good thing. That could have made it harder for them to win if you really believe what they needed to reach were moderates and swing voters. But if you think that this was an issue of turnout, that they weren't making enough of their base happy, maybe a primary could have led to their base being happier. It's also the case that, regardless of the ideology of the candidate, we might have just ended up with a candidate who might have been a stronger one than Kamala Harris turned out to be.
Right. Is there somebody in the Democratic field that might have been a stronger candidate? And you and I hadn't talked about this, earlier, so I may be putting you on the spot.
No, I mean, it's a difficult thing to say. I don't think that there is, Trump is the center of the Republican universe, and he has been for nearly a decade now. I don't think there's really anyone like that in the Democratic Party. I think AOC has the potential to be someone like that. I think there's some other figures like Cory Booker, Hakeem Jeffries, that are potential figures going forward. If we look at history, we're in 2025 right now, it's very possible to me that whoever the person is that's going to take up the mantle, we don't know their name yet. We're not talking about them right now.
Right. I'm going to liken it, and people are going to go, what? Jimmy Carter came out of the woodwork way back when.
That's right.
Somebody like I'm not saying Jimmy Carter, I'm somebody like a Jimmy Carter who wasn't unknown at the time is what you're saying.
I think that's a great example. I mean, Jimmy Carter is one of those figures, like you said, he came out of nearly nowhere. He was mostly involved in Georgia level state politics. Someone like that that's maybe been mostly in state politics that has an appeal to a broad range of people. Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan possibly comes to mind. There's a couple other states that Pritzker in Illinois is also someone that's been trying to make his name. The field field, I think, is wide open, but someone that has a lot of charisma, and I think maybe someone that's the opposite of Trump has a lot of outward compassion, like Jimmy Carter might be someone. Cory Booker might fit this frame.
Somebody not tainted by today's politics.
Exactly.
Yeah. There are also those who say that Joe Biden should have never run for a second term in the first place because there were signs of that cognitive decline even then, though the Bidens and his team deny it. This is all speculation, but we know that, Joe Biden had an ego and that he wasn't about to step aside.
That's right. It seems like both he was determined to be that second-term president. Jill Biden was clearly also pushing him in that direction. I think his friends and family, and he'd surrounded himself by people, by definition, that believe in him. That's usually what happens to politicians. They find it difficult after a career in politics to hear that no that they need to hear, precisely because they have that ability to select everyone that's around them. So Biden almost certainly should have not planned for a second term. He had the foresight originally to see that this might be an issue. He said during the first primary, he maybe would not run for a second term and maybe hand off the reins to Harris or other folks. So I think the fact that even Biden himself, when he was a little bit more cognizant, could see that that would be a good idea, it takes some of the blame off the advisors, puts more of it on Biden.
Yeah, it does. Then there's the story that before the 2024 election, George Clooney held a record-breaking fundraiser with the president and former President Barack Obama. The narrative in the book, which came out May 20th, indicates that Clooney saw him and had a knot in his stomach while watching the president take small steps and shuffle around greeting donors. Tapper and Thompson reported that when Biden reached Clooney, he appeared not to recognize the actor, who was a longtime friend of Biden's and was hosting that fundraiser. And the narrative goes, "Thank you for being here," Biden said to Clooney, per the excerpt. The greeting prompted Biden's aide, who was standing next to him, to say, "You know, George," even though it was evident that Biden didn't recognize Clooney. And according to the book, Biden's response was, yeah, kind of, dismissive. And Biden said, "Thank you for being here." Clooney was, by all counts, stunned. And not long after that, Clooney wrote an op-ed and came out against re-electing Joe Biden. That was a big turnaround for George Clooney, who for many years stood by Joe Biden.
It was. He's historically been a big backer for him. So, this was kind of lost in the shuffle over the summer before the election. But that op-ed by Clooney was a big moment. I think Clooney, a lot of folks at the New York Times and other journalists also were starting to see there's a disaster coming. So we're starting, that's a big story. And we're starting to see these stories now coming out that a lot of people, not just Clooney, close aides to Biden that he had worked with for years, they also had similar experiences with him. And anyone that's dealt with an older family member that goes through these things know that you have long periods of bright spots where nothing seems wrong, and then you have some spots where things are much more difficult. And if you have someone that's going to be in a presidential debate, as we saw what happened there, you can't have potential dark spots at any point in time, and they let it go forward anyway from there.
Well, of course, after the debate, Joe Biden basically said, "Oh, I had that long trip, and, I was just exhausted, and that's all it was." But then we found out that maybe there was more to it. And, of course, there are two sides to every story. A spokesperson for the former president defended Biden's behavior at the fundraiser, telling the reporters in a statement, no one's been able to point out where Joe Biden had to make a presidential decision or make a presidential address where he was unable to do his job because of mental decline. In fact, the evidence points to the opposite. He was a very effective president. Evidence of aging is not evidence of mental incapacity. And then there was the recent, report about his prostate cancer and the potential about hormone therapy. And doctors are saying, if that was indeed the case, sometimes that hormone therapy could get in the way of mental acuity. So, there's so many different factors here. I don't know that we're ever going to know the truth.
No, I don't either. I mean, as you say, several factors that he's dealing with, but ultimately, if you can't make that decision, if your family can't make that decision, and again, there's been historical precedent for this in presidencies. Woodrow Wilson's second term, he was largely not president. His wife was, and she hid that from the doctors. So you don't want to have to rely on the president. You want to have to rely on their family. You want to rely on advisors and people within the party to kind of push them in the direction, even if they're dealing with temporary mental infirmities, to do the right thing. And just because you can get up there and make a presidential address occasionally, that's not necessarily evidence that you should still be at the level where you're president 24/7. Those decisions have to be made all the time.
You've got the teleprompter, to guide you. And then he comes out and he appears on ABC's The View and says, he would have won if he stayed in the 2024 presidential race, saying, "I was confident I would beat Trump. He's a loser." Sean, right after that, there were a lot of Democrats who said it's time for Joe Biden to just quietly go away. And, Joe Biden, as you and I know, is a man who is very cognizant of his legacy. So you would think, if for no other reason, that basically he would at this point just go ahead and, like George Bush, after he was done, he was done.
Yeah. George W. Bush went on, became a painter for the last 20 years. The fact that Joe Biden was willing to go on The View and make that statement, I think, shows kind of the same stubbornness that we saw talked about in this book, that he's unwilling to admit what's pretty obvious to everyone else. From a political science perspective, do I think that if he had not bowed out after the debate and gone on and ran for 4 months, would he have won the election? No. It seems very hard to make a case that he would have done any better, probably worse than Harris would have. So, again, that he can't see that in himself. It's typical for politicians to be kind of blind to their own weaknesses to begin with, but especially when you're bringing the age into it and the infirmity, it's just too much to bear for him.
And I think it's kind of interesting that there are people who are dodging questions about whether Biden is fit for office, like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. He said, "We're not looking backward, we're looking forward at this particular moment in time." Democrats long tiptoed around Biden's frailty. Can they, with all the publicity right now, afford to ignore it?
If this book dropped like in October of 2026, no, they would have to deal with this. They'd have to all make statements on this. The fact that this is being done right now, I think, is almost maybe a relief for the party, that by the time we get to the midterms, we might be done talking about Joe Biden. And Hakeem Jeffries' statement there, it's somewhat public-facing, but it's also a signal to the rest of the party. There's potential for a civil war within the party. There's Biden's camp. There's people that have been associated with Biden and Obama for a long time. If you make a statement that's clearly negative towards Biden, as Hakeem Jeffries, you're now going to make enemies with parts of the party that you're trying to unify together. So I think right now they're going to just try and keep their head down, weather the storm. I would imagine you're going to get 100 statements like that saying, we're just going to focus on the present and on the future. They want this to go away, and I do think that by 2026 it will. In the next couple months, it won't.
Yeah, Chris Murphy didn't keep his head down. From Connecticut, he was on Meet the Press and said it was a mistake for Democrats to allow Joe Biden to remain in the race for as long as he did. Went on to say the American people had decided that they wanted somebody new, they wanted somebody younger. I know that hindsight is 20/20, but if they had an open primary, would it have made a difference for the Dems? We kind of, answered this. I don't know. I guess it all depends who they'd put in the race.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say is it would definitely make a difference for them. I think the confidence that it would have improved the Democrats' odds, I don't think that's necessarily earned. It entirely is possible that it might have improved their odds, but if you believe in more of a campaign strategy that you need to find a way to keep people in the center happy, a Democratic primary could have led them in the opposite direction. And Chris Murphy, by the way, is one of those people that probably is going to be in the conversation running in the 2028 primary. And the reason that he's willing to make statements like that is he's one of those insurgents that he wants to move the party somewhat in a different direction. So he's comfortable saying those things. The minority leader of the House is definitely not going to be comfortable.
I was talking to my son. We often wrestle about politics when we have conversations, and he said, you know what, if Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson from Axios, were writing this book, why didn't they tackle this topic on air more frequently? And that's a question a lot of people are asking. When Politics and Power continues, can Democrats blame all their problems on Joe Biden? And when developing their strategy for the future, what should the focus be? More Politics and Power after this break. Welcome back to Politics and Power. Bruce Hamilton with political analyst Sean Frieder. So, Sean, there are any number of opinion pieces out there asking valid questions. In USA Today, Dave Potas maintains Biden did not deceive Democrats about his decline. It's time to admit the truth. He says Democrats need to realize Biden did not hoodwink them. They willingly went along with it. Acknowledging their mishandling of the former president's decline will be better for them in the long run. So Democrats do have to accept some of the responsibility.
They do. I mean, I think electorally, again, it probably doesn't make much of a difference. We've seen from the current president, from other politicians, both on the left and the right now, deny is actually a winning strategy, even if morally it's not necessarily what you'd want the strategy to be. So Democrats, I think, largely can ignore their handling of Biden. I think that they can't get away with ignoring what Trump's doing, finding ways to convince their base that they're successfully pushing back on Trump. But in the idea that Democrats kind of went along with this. I think to a certain extent that's right. I think both people at the elite level within the party and even sort of rank and file Democrats, even just voters. Again, we've been talking about issues with Biden's frailty for years, early into the presidency. So I think to a certain extent, Democrats wanted to tell themselves a story that the damage wasn't as nearly as large as it was. Republicans maybe saw it earlier because they wanted to tell themselves that story, that the damage was pretty bad in terms of what he was able to do in the presidency. So it's easy to convince oneself that the president doesn't have the weakness that they do, and that's true for both parties.
And we'll get into this in a bit. They didn't have a message. They still don't have a message. But, some of the analysts are saying, look, sit back now. And immigration's not the message. There are other ways to go. Right now, the thing to do is let Donald Trump do his thing, and then there'll be a time to sit back and strike. But I said we'll get into that in a minute. Back to something we touched on a bit earlier. Can the Democrats blame their problems all on Biden? Wasn't lack, here we go, of a clear message in the economy a big issue with the voters, and they didn't identify that.
The economy was a huge issue. The economy always is a huge issue. If you go back for 40 years of elections, voters are going to rank the economy #1 in all of them. Democrats thought, I think they believed that they had a hold on the economy. If you look at a lot of the traditional numbers about the economy, there was a lot of recovery. We did better as a country than many other countries did post-pandemic, but there's a difference between what the numbers say and what your pocketbook looks like and how you feel about the economy. And there's clearly a disconnect that the Democrats didn't want, where voters thought the economy is not performing nearly as well as those numbers look. So I think messaging is one thing, because that's mostly what Democrats can control at this point. But the average voter, that swing voter that might make the difference in that next election, they don't pay much attention to politics. They might not hear that message. So it's a difficult thing. The economy is going to have big impacts on both parties' fortunes, but it's sort of a wild beast that can't be tamed.
Yeah, I said that Hakeem Jeffries' point was we don't want to be backward-looking, but yeah, they want to be forward-looking, but I think there are lessons to be learned from history, and they have to learn from 2024, and they have to have a spirited conversation inside the family and learn from what happened in 2024 from a number of different standpoints. What is it they need to learn?
First, I think they need to learn to listen to their base more. Trump won with a very clear-throated strategy. This is the same strategy that he used back in 2016 of, I'm going to listen to my base, I'm going to make them happy, I'm going to get them turned out, and I'm going to roll with it. And you see the results of that. 2020, he loses as a first-term president, but 2024 uses the same strategy, comes back and makes his base happy. So I think the big takeaway for Democrats is, if your base is telling you that they're upset about things like Palestine, you need to listen to them on that issue. If they're upset about generally the way the economy is going, even if you feel positively about it, you need to listen to them on that. At the same time, they still do have to find a way to make their message about the economy resonate with swing voters who might be more in the middle. But I think the big takeaway is find a way to make the base happy, because they're very unhappy, and if you don't turn out your base, you're going to have a terrifically difficult time winning.
Do they also need to understand that the playing field is changing? The Dems need to adapt, and adapt quickly. It's basically because Donald Trump created a whole new dynamic, and the policies that generated 2024 are no longer with us. There are a whole new set of realities. Do the Democrats get that? Do they need to get that?
I think some of them do. I think some of them don't. I think older Democrats are slower to realize what they need to change to. You spend your entire career in politics, you get used to the way politics is. Politics is no longer that way. It probably hasn't been for a decade. And this isn't really just about policy and ideology. This is about style. Trump's an aggressive candidate. He breaks a lot of norms. And that's not saying that Democrats need to copy Trump's style. They really shouldn't copy his style in full. But I think the aggressiveness, the confidence that they have in just backing their base and making those people happy, that's probably something that they do need to find a way to copy from Trump.
Do they need to understand they don't need to be fighting Donald Trump and the GOP on immigration, because the GOP stance on immigration is popular with the people? The 20-ton anchor around Trump's neck appears to be the economy.
There are certain things that they could do in terms of messaging about immigration. Immigration is a net positive for Trump. When you start to give people specifics on the way that immigration has been carried out, their opinion turns a lot more negative. So I think there are some opportunities there, but it's almost not worth looking at those opportunities when you really have, as you say, this anchor around your neck with the economy. The tariffs are not going going away. It's not going to happen anytime soon. He's clearly ideologically wed to these tariffs, so that's what I would hit him hard with in 2026. Nevertheless, I think the base wants to see you fighting on things that they do care about, like the way he's handled immigration. So while they might not be a winner with the swing voter, they might be a winner with the person who says, I'd vote for someone on the left, but I don't think I'll turn out because they're not listening to me.
How about that big, beautiful bill, which, if you really look at it, you know, the one that passed in the middle of the night because of the wrangling in the House and is now in the hands of the Senate, ain't really that beautiful. I mean, you've got cuts that are coming to Medicaid that will impact the health of seniors, the working poor, and the downtrodden, that will add trillions of dollars to the debt. I mean, I don't think the realities of that have sit in. Yeah, it plays to Donald Trump's domestic agenda. It also plays to Project 2025. I don't think the American public really understands what that big, beautiful bill is all about.
No, they don't, and that's pretty typical. I mean, it's not unique to this bill. People don't pay a lot of attention to specific legislation, but we do think in political science, we call it retrospective voting, that people will at least maybe look back to how things have been over the last few years when they go to vote, and they'll base it on that. So, you know, are people right now going to react to what's in that bill? They don't know what's in there, but if the bill has those effects, as you say, especially on the working poor, especially in swing states, maybe some of those communities, African Americans in the working class, that he was able to have a little bit more headway with, Latinos in the working class, if it affects them negatively, which I do think that it will, that's going to be something that he would also pay for in the midterms at the very least.
All right, so if they do finally develop a message, the one they lacked in 2024, will it resonate? And how do they get it to resonate? Because people, they don't pay attention, they don't listen, they don't watch the news. You know, they look at social media, they listen to messages that seem to follow what they believe as opposed to what's real out there.
That's right. I mean, the message itself, they do really have to work on honing that. That's a difficult thing to do, but messages that are successful in advertising and politics, they are simple and they are to the point and they cut through the noise. And it's not just about the message, it's about the carrier of the message. Trump's heard more because he attracts attention to himself naturally. And the Democrats, again, I don't think really have that clear person that does that, but they need to develop that person. If someone goes out there, regardless of what their message is, and they find a way to resonate with their rhetoric, with their appearance, with their style, with the voters, especially with the base, that's someone that, regardless of what they say, now people are listening, and you can actually have people focus on that message. But it's a two-part game. You got to get the message right, but you also got to have a deliverer of that message that people are actually going to listen to.
Somebody with some charisma. Fair to say they also need to understand they need to pick their battles because the voters' attention span is limited?
To a certain extent, I think if we're talking about the one big campaign message that they put out in 2026 or 2028, simple, straightforward, voters' attention is very limited. But there's also a lot of different venues to do this at. So I think in smaller venues, they need to be finding ways to not reach the middle, but reach their base and let the base know that they're fighting the battles that they want fought for them.
Mm-hmm. Back to that big, beautiful bill. Does it have legs in the Senate or remain to be seen? Because I don't know what's going on in Congress. I don't know that Congress knows what's going on in Congress.
I don't know that they do either. I mean, Republicans control the Senate. We can identify at least 4 senators on the Republican side that have been deeply skeptical of a lot of things that Trump has done, but we also can't identify a lot of moments where those 4 senators all in unison prevented something from going through the Senate. So if they were to stop this bill from going through in its current form, that would be the first time we've really seen them take a major action to stop something that the Trump administration wants to do. I think it's possible. I think that there's things in this bill that are going to upset those 4 or 5 senators that could turn, but every time we say maybe they'll do this, we then see that they choose not to. So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic that they would take some action on this, but I don't necessarily think that they will.
Is there so much mixed messaging out there that it causes people either to just tune out, be confused, or just become apathetic?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a fire hose of information. You know, we are probably in what we'd call the attention economy at this point. So getting people to pay attention is difficult precisely because everyone's a carnival barker. Everyone's trying to get that attention. If everything is noisy, then no one's able to pay attention because of just simply the noise. So finding ways to cut through is more difficult than ever. Democrats, I don't think, have that way to do that. Trump is the one person in the Republican Party I think can. I think if he goes away tomorrow, I don't think J.D. Vance is that person that can cut through. I don't think that Marco Rubio can cut through. So the people that have the level of charisma and the ability to draw attention to them, they're few and far between, and the Democrats need to find theirs.
You talk to economists. They say that we are already to a point where we are in a very bad situation. Interest rates in many places are at 20%. Credit card debt is very high. The American public is going to be in a world of hurt. Given that, do you think that eyes are going to start to open?
Economic pain does seem to open eyes. I mean, if we look at what happened in the 2024 elections, in the entire period around the world between 2020 and 2024, incumbent administrations, regardless of what they had done on any other issue other than the economy, were being punished by voters because the economy was painful across the entire world. So it's clear enough that if you do cause enough economic pain, people do pay attention. They vote with their pocketbook. Now, I don't think that that's going to be Republicans necessarily waking up to the economic realities. I think that, people within the tribe like to defend people within the tribe. But I think that they're going to be a lot of the swing voters that he depended on to win in 2024, that now they're going to be, instead of being mad at Biden's economy, they're going to be mad at Trump's economy over the next several years. And so I could easily see us just swinging back to the Democratic Party on the strength of that alone.
So you think that the 2028 midterm elections could bring about some change in America?
I do think so. I mean, all you have to do is take control of one chamber for the Democrats to completely change the Trump administration's ability to at least pass legislation. The House is very vulnerable. If I had to make a guess right now, it would be the House, not the Senate, that would flip. I think that's entirely possible. But we've also then again seen with the Trump administration their willingness to really go mostly through the executive branch to try to get things done. So winning of the House would matter, but it would probably matter less than it would in any other administration.
And, we say this keeping in mind, too, that there are members of Congress who are in the Republican Party that have the power to say no to some of these measures and some of these bills that can mitigate some of the damage that's being done.
They do, and they're afraid of two things. They're afraid of, one, in reports that we've seen, death threats. They want to protect themselves and their family, and two, they're afraid of Trump. If you fight Trump, you're going to get primaried very, very likely in the next primary election. So you might not survive to the midterms if you go after Trump. You're in a very difficult position if you're a Republican moderate right now.
All right. Politics and power. We know where all the power is these days, and you have the power to be heard. Appreciate you watching. Sean, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Have a great day.
See why every day more people are choosing News4JAX, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.